I think there's a balance of looking at where the revenue comes in and keeping those streams nourished, so to speak, but also having that focal point of that joy and interest and nourishing that as well. And the two together, I feel like that is truly where the magic happens.
That was Joanne Ozug, and this is episode number 111 of the Chopped Podcast. Hey everyone, I'm Marley of the blog Namely Marley. I am your host, and this is the Chopped Podcast. You know, this is the podcast designed for people just like you, bloggers who love food. My goal each week is to share with you thoughts, stories, interviews, everything related to food blogging so we can all learn together about what works with food blogging and maybe even a little bit about what doesn't. Before we get started, I just want you to know how much I appreciate you. These are busy days for food bloggers. I feel it too. So I appreciate the time you take to listen to the Chopped Podcast. Why not head over to iTunes or Stitcher and leave a review or subscribe to really help the show out a lot. Also, you can go to choppedcon.com today and sign up for our newsletter. That way you'll get the latest on all things food blogging delivered right to your inbox. Okay, let's get to today's episode. Today I'm talking to Joanne Ozug. She's of the site 15 Spatulas. I met Joanne a few years ago at a food blogging conference, one of those brand excursions, and we were seated next to each other on the bus headed back to the conference. And I just remember really enjoying talking to Joanne. Our discussion was great, and I was just struck by how personable, professional, and also she was just so thoughtful. I really enjoyed talking with her. So I was really thrilled for the chance to get to speak with her again, and then I realized my first impressions of her were spot on. Today, Joanne and I are discussing the mess of food blogging. Okay, it's not really a mess, but it can feel like it, don't you think? I mean, there's just so much stuff to do at any given moment. How do you decide on the latest social media platform to join, or whether you should participate in yet another Facebook group, or just, the mountain of emails you have to go through in any given day? So Joanne and I discussed the very topic of things like Facebook groups and how you can decide which ones to be a part of or not. And I want you to know I left that discussion with a sense of empowerment. If you want to be in those Facebook groups because you feel like they're really helping you meet a goal that you have for your blog, then you should do it. However, if you're only in those groups because you feel like you should be in them, but maybe that's where all the cool people are, I don't know. Or if, you just feel like it's something that other people are doing and you feel like, wow, it's on your radar screen and you should be a part of it. There's a really big chance that then that just becomes busy work. Free up some of that space in that group by removing yourself and allow someone else who is enthusiastic about it to step in. Okay, I realize those words can spark a little bit of fear. I feel it too. What if you give up your spot in that group and it turns out that that group is the thing? Like everyone in that group turns into be rockstar bloggers with huge traffic. I know it's a risk that you take, but as Joanne and I discuss, you have to kind of Marie Kondo that type of approach. Marie Kondo, she's the author of the book, The Joy of Tidying Up. And Marie tells us in her book, if something isn't bringing you joy, then get rid of it. I know she's talking about sweaters in your closet or books in your, on the shelf. But those things can apply to your work as well. If something that you're doing is not bringing you joy, you should be getting rid of it or finding other things that provide you more joy. That said, there is a caveat. There may be some things that you do that don't bring you joy, but you kind of have to do it. Like invoicing your clients might be a good example. Maybe you hate it, but you kind of need to do that in order to pay the bills, right? So obviously you can't get rid of everything that you hate. Although I do think that I've been working on lately is kind of changing my attitude and finding joy in the things that I think I hate to do, but really have to do. So if, for the example on invoicing clients, if I dread that, why not flip that attitude into something that I'm grateful for because it does help pay my bills. And it's also respecting the work that I'm putting into things and the value that I bring to the table. So there's some ways to kind of trick yourself, I think, into realizing, the the joy and even the mundane, I guess. So there's tricks on both sides of this. Really, it comes down to finding ways to understand and know yourself. And Joanne and I talk about that as well on today's show. We also talk about other just general blogging tips. I think there's a lot there for everybody. So I know that I left the discussion with Joanne feeling so inspired, and I hope you will too. Okay, y'all, let's get right to it. Here's today's feature interview with Joanne Ozug. Hey everyone, I'm happy to have Joanne Ozug of the site 15 Spatulas. Hey Joanne, welcome to the Chopped Podcast.
Thank you. I'm so happy to be here. Thanks for having me.
I'm so glad to have you here. And in fact, I'm sitting here drinking a cup of hot tea, and I'm really just like imagining us sitting at a coffee shop together having this wonderful chat because, you and I actually met at a food blogging conference before, and I just, really enjoyed talking with you. So I'm really looking forward to our discussion today.
Me too. Oh my gosh, I should have gotten some tea. It's okay.
It's not too late. You can go get some. Well, there was a lot of things that we didn't get a chance to talk about the last time we were together. And I feel like we've got a lot of different directions we can go, of course. But, more than anything, I'm really looking forward to talking with you about some inspiration that we can share with other food bloggers. So, but first, I have to ask you a question. And typically I ask the question, what is it that caused you to start your blog? But I would love for you to answer that question. And I would also love for you to answer the question, why 15 spatulas? Where did you come up with that name?
Everyone asks me that.
I bet.
So I started my food blog in 2010, and I had just gotten married to my husband, and he was a submarine officer in the Navy, and he was stationed in a rural part of Georgia. So I moved out there, and I had been looking for jobs kind of in my education background, which is in economics and business. I found a company I liked, went through the interviews, and started an assignment for them. And I basically was miserable. And I was actually on the phone with my parents, and they just said I sounded just so miserable. And I realized I really didn't want to go down that path, even though my whole life had led me to think I was going to do a very corporate type job. And so I emailed my husband. He was actually in the ocean on the submarine. I emailed him and I said, I want to do something in food. And so I decided to start a food blog just completely on a whim after my friend had mentioned it. And being in the Navy, you move around a lot. And I knew that we were only going to be there for a couple of years. And I thought, I'm going to do a food blog just to kind of hold me over until our next duty station. It could serve as like a resume or something just when I was looking for new work. But, people ask me, hey, what have you been doing the past couple of years? Yes. This is what I've been up to. Because I lived in a pretty rural part of Georgia. Just for reference, it was like an hour from Honey Boo Boo. So it was like, the thick of Georgia. And there wasn't really a food scene there. So I thought, I'm going to share some recipes and just see where this goes. And the crazy thing is I always thought it would be the bridge to something else, not like the whole thing that my life is really centered around. And now my husband's actually out of the Navy and working with me as well. So it's just been crazy how it's all worked out.
Did you have an interest in food? I mean, what was it that, made you think of food blog?
I had an amazing childhood in terms of food. Like my mom, she is from South Korea. So I grew up eating authentic Korean food. She also went to culinary schools in Italy and France. So, I mean, I wasn't eating like meatloaf and mac and cheese. Yeah. I was eating incredible food. And I mean, how do you not fall in love when there's just so many flavors happening all the time?
And so I'm just curious then, on your blog, did that lead you, I mean, you might have been inspired by a lot of different things I could imagine going from there, but was it more like the instructional side? I mean, because you probably had a lot of experience being raised by a mother who had gone to culinary school.
Yeah, so I guess what I really wanted to do, back in 2010, there were a couple of like blogs and websites that did step-by-step photos and showed more of the process.
Yeah.
Now I feel like it's really standard, but back then it wasn't as common, although there are some people doing it. And I really wanted to focus on that, trying to make cooking from scratch seem less intimidating.
Right.
So that was kind of my focus when I started, is just sharing everyday type food, but really showing every step of the way so people could feel like they could conquer something if they had never tried it before.
I love it. That's great. Okay, so what about the photography? Because one time it's easy to like start a blog, and then it's quite another thing to get the photography. Did you come with a set of photography skills already, or did you have to develop that?
I had no training before. I totally just got a DSLR, the cheapest one that I could find, and it was all trial and error. And I wouldn't have it any other way. I mean,
Really?
it was really fun to just see that journey. And of course, there are so many tutorials now. I think that's really helpful.
Yeah.
But, I just played around back then.
I see. So in other words, it's almost like a trial by fire kind of thing.
Yeah, and I'm so proud of how far I've come. I actually really I cringe too, but I really love looking back at the older posts and just seeing that just by practicing that I've gotten so far.
When you look back at your older posts, I mean, like old photos, I can actually remember where I was when I shot them and what I was thinking. There is a lot to those photos. Yeah.
Me
Yeah.
too.
Because we've changed houses since I first started my blog. And so I can remember what room I was in. Because sometimes I would try different rooms to try to see if I could get the light just right. And because we have a lot of trees in our older house. And so I would kind of play around with different rooms. And I remember exactly where I was at with each photo.
Right, me too. That's so funny.
Yeah. Okay. So is there some part of food blogging so far that's just been a great fit for you that you really have just connected with?
I feel like everyone says this, and it's because it's true. It's the community.
Yeah.
Obviously, I really love food and I love sharing recipes, but it makes it so much better when people say they're actually making the stuff. And just sharing, even with Thanksgiving, like holidays like that, like people saying, "Oh, this is what I'm making this year." I think that's so fun. It's such a joy. Like food is such a joy, and I love that I can kind of nourish that in my little corner of the internet, so to speak.
Yeah, I was just reading a post on the health benefits of baking, and like they were talking about how you get the chance to physically move around, you get to engage different senses. So I feel like in some ways you're right. Like encouraging people to be in their kitchens and cooking just feels like it's the right thing to do.
That's an awesome article. I
Yeah,
love that.
I'm gonna make a note, see if I can remember to find that article and share it with people. Benefits
The
of
health
baking.
benefits of
Yeah.
baking.
Okay, so has there been any areas of blogging that you just like, I just hate this, that kind of thing?
Oh man. So I this is interesting because as much as I love food blogging and have loved my journey, my personality, I've discovered that there is a should monster inside of me. And I feel like it's so easy when you're your own boss and everything's changing, new platforms, new practices are coming
Yeah.
in all the time. And you have to decide like what exactly you're doing. And if you're not doing something and you're not like really deliberate about it, about the fact that you're choosing not to do something or choosing to do something, like the guilt and the should monster can kind of run amok, at least for my personality. And so that has probably been one of the things that I've liked least about my journey. I think it's a lot of it is my personality, because I'm thinking like there are points where I'm just like, man, if I had myself as a boss at like a corporate work environment, I would be out of there.
Yeah.
Like,
Yeah.
you can be really hard on yourself
Uh-huh.
sometimes.
It's true. Like the boss is expecting you to do all of these things. It's impossible. Yeah.
Right.
Actually, that leads me to some, it's a really great segue into some good questions. And I think really the theme of what we're talking about today is, there is so many things that come our way as food bloggers in today, the state of food blogging today, because I think the job description is like spread so much. Like, I don't know. I can't even go into all the details, but I'm just curious. When you started in 2010, did you feel like that was the case?
No. And I've actually been talking about this topic with a lot of friends lately, who are also food bloggers. I feel like the state of blogging right now is just insane. And, I think this is why a lot of people are talking about this slow blogging movement, because people are so burned out. And if you don't set boundaries for yourself, like you will literally go insane. Um, Not literally, but almost. I've felt like that at times where I'm just like, oh my gosh, I'm at wit's end. This is too much.
Yeah. You could definitely have a breakdown or burnout, a serious case of burnout if you pursue the candle at both ends, at the rate that you
Yes.
could.
And I tell you, honestly, I've done that so many times, more times than I care to admit.
Yeah.
And that's been one of the biggest like personal developments over the past several years, is really figuring out how to set those boundaries and take care of myself, just because it's so easy for my personality type, which is very driven, self-starter,
Yes, me too.
just to run amok with all the things and the shoulds.
Yes. Well, and I think it's important to point out, I mean, obviously this audience is primarily food bloggers, so they probably get it, but it may be good just to say these words. I feel like a food blog is probably harder than most blogs because there's so much work that goes into each post. Like
Right.
maybe if you're writing a business blog, you probably need to do some research and you're going to have some links and some references on that post. But as a food blogger, we have to test the recipe, which can require 3 or 4 times of making the same recipe over and over. You got to write the recipe in a way that's understandable for the audience and works. And then, you've got to get all that in the post. You've got to shoot it. Nowadays, there's video as well. Then you've got to share each post on social media. And sometimes that's like 2 or 3 shares or whatever. I mean, there's formulas on how best to share to social media. And you have to be engaged in those social media audience as well. I mean, I'm feeling tired just talking to you about it.
You're actually reminding me of, I started a checklist at one point that just has columns and columns of all the things that I have to do for every single post. And you really do realize how much there is in every single post. I totally agree.
Tags, SEO, expertise on all those. And then that's just on an individual post. There's also like, being your own PR agent or, working with brands and integrate, just the emails we get alone is just overwhelming sometimes,
Oh my gosh. Yeah.
So that leads us to a good question. I mean, how can somebody decide what is the most important thing? Like, in other words, okay, let me just take this back. Can we do it all?
Not for long, in my opinion.
Yeah.
So I think that it can be very tempting to try to do it all. And what's interesting, I've been thinking a lot about this. There was a point where I was in a lot of the food blogging groups on Facebook.
Yes.
And I had to just, leave the groups, get rid of putting them in my favorites and just step back because, it's just an example where it is a place where you can get ideas. And I think it's great to share knowledge, but you can also start to feel like you aren't doing things that you should be doing.
Yes.
And I think that, what I've realized is with your own business, you really have to look at all your different platforms, your revenue, and really determine your actions from studying and taking a look at that. Because if you are taking your time and you're doing these things that other people are doing and you think you should do them, that may not necessarily be the right thing to do for yourself. And I know that this is kind of a concept that everyone has obviously probably thought about before, but I just feel like it's so easy to get off track from that. And, every time I'm reminded of it, I really have this moment of pause where I'm like, yes, like I have not been looking internally enough at what is right for me. And I was thinking the other day even about how my revenue, sources have changed so much over the 6 years that I've been doing this. And I actually, it's for tax purposes, but I keep a spreadsheet of where all my income comes in. But it's also great to just study and look and see like where's my revenue coming in from, and seeing how that changes and shifting your activities.
So not that I'm asking you to go into numbers or anything, but so I mean, just to kind of read, the listeners an idea, that could be that maybe early on you were getting a lot from ads and, as that environment changed, probably not, based on anything on your end, but just the environment out there changed, it probably, can impact your income and then sponsored posts. I mean, there's all different kinds of revenue streams that can come from having a food blog. So I can see where that can play out over the years.
Yeah, I mean, I think that ads were definitely a lot bigger earlier on. But I think there are just more and more opportunities for people. I mean, I started YouTube, I think around 2012, and I've been doing food blogging and YouTubing, I guess, since then. And, a lot of my work has kind of shifted into like on-camera talent type projects, even though I do still do, sponsored posts on my blog as well.
Right.
But it's just really grown as the years have gone on.
And your YouTube channel is mostly food related as well?
Yes, it's basically just recipe tutorials. That's the core of it.
I see. And are you in those? Are those like, the tasty whatever videos where you're just showing your hands, or are you actually in them?
I am actually in them. And, a lot of people say that they're too afraid to be on camera, which I get. But I think that it's something that's very appealing to brands, because a lot of the videos, they really want like a person actually there, like delivering these message points or just kind of talking about the food. And I feel like you cannot do that as much with just B-roll of the food, like in the tasty style things.
Yeah.
So I'm actually really glad that I started out that way. And I have to say, I really love it too. So I totally understand that the place for the tasty style video, and I'll actually take my close-up YouTube footage and repurpose it on Facebook and just have, the close-up there, because people don't really want to see, a host on Facebook as much, in my opinion, at least for food.
Yeah. I see what you're saying. Right. Maybe on Facebook Live, but not on the videos.
Right. Like those quick 1 minute, 2 minute food tutorials.
Yeah. Exactly. So do you feel like having, this presence on YouTube has helped expand your audience?
Yeah, it's so funny. When I started on YouTube, I really just thought that it would be a hosting platform for my videos, and I would embed them in my blog post.
Yeah.
Because, my whole thing was step-by-step photos, and I thought, there's some things you could actually really see better if it were just on video instead of step-by-step photos. Yeah. So I started doing video because of that.
Wow,
and I was just embedding the videos into my blog and just trying to serve my blog audience. But a YouTube audience just started forming. And one of the biggest epiphanies or realizations that I had is that they're actually pretty different audiences. Earlier on, I tried to just view them as kind of the same people, and they're absolutely not. My blog audience and my YouTube audience are pretty different.
Really?
And I've actually, all of my recipes are everyday things that you can make, like food that you actually, prepare for yourself, like on weekdays. But my blog audience is a little bit more gourmet and up for more difficult recipes, whereas my YouTube audience is not. And so they're both 15 spatulas, but I do treat them a little bit differently in terms of the content that I create for them.
Okay, I know these questions are going in a line that's not exactly what we were trying to talk about, but I'm just so curious. So you have some different content on the YouTube channel than you do on the food blog.
Right. So, I mean, there are recipes that I've posted on my YouTube channel that I've never posted on my blog, and vice versa.
Interesting. That's really cool. It really does kind of go with what we're talking about here, though, and that is, it sounds like you have been pretty specific about the things that you're doing. You're putting content on your blog and you're also doing YouTube. How does that translate into the kinds of work that you do on social media? I mean, in other words, I think we're trying to talk about ways you can pare down the work that you do. Are you also doing things on social media?
Yeah, so social media is interesting because
I
I
know.
think that you do need to be on certain platforms,
Yeah.
but not to the extent that you think you do.
Mm.
Um, I am on Facebook, although it's definitely I'm not posting as much as I used to. Um, Snapchat is like an example of something that I tried for like a day because everyone's like, you have to be on Snapchat, and it's not even on my phone. Like I don't do it.
Yeah.
Uh, Pinterest, I actually recently decided that I'm not doing anymore,
Really?
which I think would really surprise some people.
Yeah.
And I think people would say like, no, you got to be on Pinterest still. But it truly, I mean, I'll pin my new posts,
Right.
but in terms of like, I used to pin 30 times a day, and I know that there's some people who insist that you should be pinning 100 times a day, and they do that.
I mean,
You
literally
know,
100 times a day. We're not kidding here, people.
I know.
I
I
can't
mean,
even fathom that.
yeah, it doesn't make sense.
Yeah.
So like I said, even I don't even pin every day anymore. I just pin my new post and that's it. And it was hard to let myself do that, make that deliberate decision, but it makes so much sense. I've never really my blog has never really been, a big Pinterest type blog. And the types of my posts that have gone viral have been from, other people making collages of my stuff. Like,
Interesting.
yeah, but not really anything that I feel I've done deliberately. And I truly don't think it's worth my time, and my revenue, my income sources reflect that as well.
That's really the thing I like about that too is it can actually change your approach towards your content. You are no longer tied to having all these big tall photos. I mean, not to say that you don't want to do those because obviously other people are going to share your content on Pinterest, so that's good to have some, but you don't have to have 20 tall photos on your site, you know?
Right. And making those big collages and
Yes.
embedding them and hiding them. And
Uh-huh.
there's a lot that goes with it. And it's honestly been really nice to be kind of free of that and not feel guilty. And of course, this is the bread and butter for some types of blogs, but I just know it's not for me and my business.
Can I ask you a question about Instagram? Because this is probably could apply to Facebook too. And when you're talking about your shoulds, this should monster that lives inside of you, I have one too. I think it wears bright red lipstick. I like to picture my monsters. Anyway, Instagram is a great example because people will say to you, you should respond to everybody who leaves a comment on your Instagram post. I see several people that do Instagram that don't respond to every comment. I'm just curious, like, are those the kinds of things that you could say, okay, I'm going to be on Instagram, but I don't feel like I have to respond to every comment?
That's definitely me. I mean, I've learned that I need to be so protective
Yes.
of my energy. And I reply to people's comments sometimes, just because I want to. And
Yes.
that's the only reason
Right.
why I do it. Um, I definitely don't think you necessarily have to do that. And I think this is where I think this comes down to what stage of blogging you might be in. Because I know that I don't have time to like reply to every single thing anymore. But I try my best to reply, and if I really want to, I will. But I think that that's one of those tasks where there can be a million of them where you tell yourself you have to do that, and it's something that other people say that they do and that you should do as well. But you really have to check in with yourself and decide if that's something you want to do.
Also, I think what I heard out of that is that if you're brand new to blogging and you are growing your network and growing your audience, then I could see where it would be really important to respond to every comment on your blog, on social media, everything.
Right. And I mean, isn't it just seems so much better when you reply to someone because you are craving that discussion, that interaction versus like you're responding to someone because you're like, oh, I have to comment back to everyone.
Yeah.
Like there's just something about like that energy that I don't like. So,
Yes.
That's really what's driving me is, do I want to engage with this person because I truly want to? And that goes across the board with everything, like my business practices and deciding how I spend my time.
So I talked to Jen Herman. She's an Instagram expert back in episode 61, and she mentioned that you should also have that same philosophy about your feed. So let's say a blogger follows you. I mean, the next question is, should you follow them back? And her response was, you should follow people back if you like what they have on their site or that they're sharing, you like their content and you would like to see that in your feed. Otherwise, you should not.
That's amazing. I so agree with that.
Yeah. Her point being, if you like your feed, you'll engage with it more and therefore you'll actually do better on Instagram as a result.
Yes, I so agree. And I think that there's something authentic about that, which is so important.
I just hear in you the same things that go on inside my head too. And that is this, there's this people pleaser in me that like, I don't want to hurt anybody's feelings, But at some point, I think a people pleaser gets in the way of being your true authentic self. You have to find that balance.
Oh my gosh, it's so true. There's definitely is a people pleaser inside of me as well. And, it's something that I've really worked on and tried to apply to not only my personal life, but my business.
Absolutely. Okay, so let's give some advice to people. What are some tips that we can give on how to how to decide what they should be doing? Because there is so much to be, you could be involved in so many things as a food blogger.
Right. So I do think that it depends on where you're at. A good place to start is, your actual interest.
Mm-hmm.
I mean, as much as I poo-poo on Snapchat, for instance, like if you love it, you should absolutely do it. Because I think that authentic interest is really, it's the first step in that creativity.
Yeah.
Whereas if you're doing it just because you don't want to fall behind or you want to keep up with other bloggers or you think you should be doing it, you never become like a big person on Snapchat or whatever doing that. But more than anything, besides just doing whatever you want to, if you think it's fun, I was at a YouTube workshop the other day. I live in New York City and there's a YouTube workshop here just in case anyone's curious. You should check it out. But the teacher was talking about how he just kept driving this point home about how you need to study yourself, like really look at like your presentation, like your content, like what you're doing. And I mean, I really think people don't do that enough. I don't know how many, how much people look at their analytics or like do kind of a self-audit.
Yes.
I get the impression that a lot of people actually don't. Because I know I've heard a lot of people say that they don't even look at their statistics, for instance. And I get that, sometimes you don't really want to look for other reasons.
Yeah. Sometimes I feel like my analytics, it's like my weight. It's like, I just don't want to know. I'm either looking at it every day or I'm not looking at it at all.
Yes, I totally get that. But I also think that you got to look and see, what's going on. And see where your opportunities are, see where your income comes from and focus on that. I think that there are general rules like, okay, the core social medias are Facebook and Pinterest, let's say. Yeah. But, as we talked about earlier, I'm not doing Pinterest anymore. And I know that's like, food blogger not doing Pinterest, but it makes sense for me.
When I heard you say that about we should know ourselves or, understand, I actually thought of ourselves as far as like the clothes that we wear or maybe even the look of our site. I mean, I feel like sometimes we don't spend a lot of time thinking about how it flows, the content flows. I think all of that could be really important.
Absolutely. And something that's floating around in my brain that I love to mention too is like, I feel like it's so easy to fill your time with, having to do certain tasks or certain social platforms. Yeah. And it almost doesn't, you have to leave room and just be conscious of not doing too much where you You need to have space for ideas and like new innovation, inspiration.
Yeah.
Things like I cannot remember who it was, and there's probably a few people doing it, but just doing things like starting cookbook clubs, like online, like within their blog, which, everyone's not doing that. I think that's a really cool
Yeah.
idea. Um,
And they just cook the recipes from that book?
yeah, it's basically like a virtual online meeting,
Oh,
just like a
nice.
cookbook club.
I heard somebody say, I like the line of thought that you're going on. I heard somebody say recently that they were talking about our minds, but it, if you look at it like a garden and you have to when you grow a garden, you're not actually growing the garden. What you're doing is creating space for the seeds that you plant to grow. And so their point was, even with our minds, we have to let there be some space, or even in our lives, let there be some space for the good stuff to grow from. And I love that analogy. I think that's what I heard about even the work that we're doing on our sites. If we're busy, busy,
Yes.
busy, we're not like allowing room for things to grow.
Oh my gosh, that's amazing. Such a great reminder that I think all of us can never hear enough, is to have that space.
Yeah.
It's so precious. It's
Yes.
so easy to go out the window.
So true. That said, okay, let's pretend there's a new social media and everybody's talking about it. We'll call it uh, Green Bottle social media, and everybody's like, "Oh, you've got to be on Green Bottle because that's the site that's all the traffic's coming from." Um, we could talk about Vine, for example. Everybody was going crazy about Vine, right? And everybody, they were sharing on Facebook, like, "Look, I'm on Vine," and blah blah blah. And then Vine kind of went. Obviously, it's like gone now. So what are your thoughts when new social media comes out? Should we hop on the bandwagon? How do we decide those kinds of things?
It's so funny you mentioned that, because I feel like I've seen so many things like that
Yeah.
come and go.
Yep.
Google Plus, Vine, of course, like even Periscope,
Yep.
and even
Hello.
lesser known things.
Uh-huh. Yes.
I know that, like, the way that I look at those things is I try it out, and if I genuinely love it and think it's fun, I'll do it. But
Yeah.
otherwise, I usually won't, and kind of wait it out. And I think that, on the flip side of that, of course, like maybe it blows up and it's a main thing and you're someone who adopts it later. I mean, that does kind of stink, but I think that you can, I said this earlier, run amok. I
Yeah.
think that if you think, oh, this new thing's coming up, I need to do that, that can kind of get out of control in terms of your time and having that space. Because really, we all do so much. There's not enough time for everything.
Yeah.
And the things that you do, it needs to fill you up or like really be productive in some way. So either you really love it and it fills you up in terms of like energy, inspiration, or creativity, or it's something, I mean, not everything that we do, of course, is like really fun and wonderful. There are tasks that you just kind of have to do. They're business practices, and it's important for your business, and that's something else. But I think that genuine interest and like inspiration has to be there.
Yeah. I think all of this is leading back to the importance of really knowing yourself and understanding what drives you and what really makes you happy when you're doing that.
Yeah, and I feel like it's knowing yourself and also giving yourself permission to let things go. And I think, back
Yeah.
earlier when I was talking about, being in these food blogger groups or wherever and seeing these articles or people talk about the things that you should be doing versus actually looking at your own numbers and doing a self audit and deciding from there. I mean, it's so much easier to just do what other people say you
Yeah.
should do,
Right.
because then if it doesn't turn out right, it's, you can somewhat blame those people, or just, no, like it wasn't, I shouldn't have spent my time doing that, versus when you're really deciding deliberately based on yourself. But I think that it's so much better to really look at yourself and be brave and do what you think is right for you, and just not listen as much to what other people say.
I think a great example of that is like you're talking about all those Facebook groups. Like I was in several of them that, you share this, it's like a Facebook post and then other people will share back and then you share and somebody will leave comments. I was in several groups like that. And I finally started to realize, like, why am I doing this? Is this benefiting my business in some way, or is it just busy work? And to me, it felt more like it was busy work.
I agree. I so agree with that. And I I love the way you said, "Why am I doing this?" Because that question has come up, and I actually have a post-it note on my computer screen that says, "Why am I doing this?"
Ah,
Because it's you have to ask yourself that
yes.
about so many things. I mean,
Yeah.
there should be some good reason, whether it's just like, you truly love it or there's a purpose for it. It should never be just because you think you should, because usually those are just empty. They're guilt driven or like rat race driven
Right.
is what I usually find.
So, in other words, what I think I'm hearing you say is, let's say Facebook is a great example since we're talking about these groups. Maybe spending some time on Facebook is a good idea, but it may not be in those groups. Maybe it's doing a Facebook Live demonstration of your latest cookie recipe or things like that, that we're hearing is getting some really good engagement and might help you be more engaged with your audience. That seems to me like it might have a greater return on your effort.
Yes. And I think that, something like Facebook Live, for instance, I've been thinking about that a lot, of
I was
course,
going to
because
ask you
it's
that.
new. And
Yeah.
I have a brand that I've worked with for a few years who, every year during the holidays, they reach out. And this year they're like, "What have you done with Facebook Live? Like, we're very interested in it." And I, I haven't done it yet. It's actually kind of terrible because I totally been meaning to,
Yeah.
but I, even when thinking about it, um, you know, it's something that I would like to do just because I think it would be fun. And I think that is the biggest reason and the most important reason to do it. But, and actually it's funny because I just thought about Google Hangout Live and
Yes.
actually how I used to do that. I feel like this is a new chance to get back into that again. Because I remember loving that interaction with
Yes.
people who are essentially like there virtually in the kitchen with you.
Yep.
Um, but I think that the fun thing about doing something like Facebook Live, if you're doing it just because you're curious, is you never know when you do something like what you might conclude at the end of it. What I mean is, like, you may find out that you think it's really fun, and maybe you're someone who would do more on camera talent type work and you don't really know.
Right.
I think it's part of that space idea, where you have a little bit of time where you just let your curiosity and interest and, oh man, it's so funny to just say, do it because you want to, because it sounds so like trite in a way, or so like simple, but it reminds me of that Marie Kondo book that went crazy. Like,
Yes.
does this thing
The art
spark
of
joy?
tidying
Like,
up. Yeah.
yeah, it's so simple, but we don't we don't act in that way enough. At least I found that it's so easy to not act in that way enough.
Right.
And magical things happen when you come back to that and bring that as more of a center into your business. I think there's a balance of, looking at where the revenue comes in and keeping those streams nourished, so to speak, but also having that focal point of that joy and interest and nourishing that as well. And the two together, I feel like that is truly where the magic happens.
Okay, so that was so magical. I want you to say it again. I needed to like really sink in.
Oh gosh, I get to remember
Yeah.
I say this right. I, just over my 6 years doing 15 spatulas as a business, I feel like I've gone on both ends of the spectrum with that. I've turned into an output monster where I was just burning the candle at both ends, working like crazy, trying to do all of the things and not really focusing on, like, what could be a fun project that I could do right now? Like, purely just doing things that I thought, if I spend my time doing this, it is clear to me what I will get in return, like what kind of output I'll get. And there's also been times where, I burned out from that previous time and I thought, you know what? I am just going to do what I think is fun. I don't have a set schedule anymore, just completely flipping it. And I think that there is a magic in finding the middle ground between the two. And it just builds and it's sustainable. I think that living on either end of the spectrum is not sustainable, or at least it hasn't proved to be that way for me.
I see what you're saying. So like not having an agenda every day versus living overly structured. You've got to find a balance between those two.
Yes, I so believe that. And I think it's harder than it sounds, I think. I feel like it's taken me a long time to get there.
I get that.
You know, one example that that I'll share that's been very real and true for me lately is, earlier on, when I lived in Georgia, actually, this is probably like 2011, I was doing a fair amount of live TV just at the local like NBC, ABC affiliate. And when you do something like that, I mean, basically you got to bring in all the food, prep everything. Like there's no assistance in that versus something national like the Today Show. You show up and a team there prepares all of your food. Everything's taken care of. You just basically show up and do your clip. Something like the live TV thing for something local where I'd have to prepare all of it. I think, I don't really get much back from that in terms of like, when you do something like that, you typically don't get a lot of blog readers or traffic or anything. It's just kind of
great exposure
for for exposure, for your own experience. And so I wouldn't do something like that previously. It's like, I don't have enough time for something like that. But lately, I started to get more into that because I really enjoy it. And I think it's fun. And, even if it doesn't seem obvious, like, oh, if I go on this, local news thing, I'll spend X amount of hours doing it, and I'm not really going to get traffic or anything foreseeable out of it. I feel like that you can get so into that thinking, it can almost become dangerous where you don't do anything new.
Yes.
And it's been fascinating just at points where I look back from where I started and where I'm at now, and to see, it's like that Steve Jobs thing, how you look back and you can only connect the dots looking backward. And just seeing how so many of the really pivotal things that have helped me grow in terms of my audience, my income, they were kind of things that I did on a whim. Like I had no idea that something substantial would come out of it. And that's not why I did it, so to speak. And those are kind of those like, those fun, like on a whim, like magical things that I'm talking about, where you do something because you want to do it. It's inspiring for you. And just seeing where that goes.
I see that. I think that's really, really powerful, rather than evaluating everything on what can it do for you? What can it get me more traffic? Can it bring me money? Can it, every now and then it's really a good idea just to see like, will this bring me joy? How about that as a metric?
Yes. At least some of the time. Right. I mean, it doesn't have to be that way all the time, but there should be some room for both.
Yeah. I love that. Scheduling your day, but also scheduling time for some joy and whatever that means for you.
Yeah.
Oh, I love that. Okay. This is so, I'm really enjoying this conversation. Do you have anything you want to share, on this topic of like, how do you decide what it is that you can do in your day, and how do you decide what not to do? Or did we cover it?
I think just the awareness around it can be huge. And I really hope that people think about that more and ask that question, why am I doing this? I think there's so much power in that. Like, why am I doing this? Because I love it, because I want to. Like there's something about asking those questions that makes it better. Why am I doing this? Wait, I don't want to do this. I'm not going to do this. Like there's something that like, that in particular can make like the guilt or the shoulds go away. I just think it's such a great question. Just having that awareness can be so powerful.
Now, can I ask you a question? Is there a difference in your mindset if you have lipstick on or not when you answer that question? Because like, I mean, you know what I mean? Like sometimes if I am too many days in my yoga pants and I'm, I may be busy and doing the right things, but I don't necessarily have the right attitude about it. So I'm just curious if you found that to be when you're working from home.
Oh man. So I'm not sure I follow. So are you asking me if I like get dressed in my work clothes at home?
Yeah.
I don't. I'm like in my robe most of the time, honestly. I have like 5 robes. It's terrible. I actually, when I lived in Connecticut, the UPS man, like every single time he came to my house, was in a robe, a big fluffy pink robe.
He's probably like, I want that job.
That's right. Yeah, I mean, I've heard that so many times that you need to dress up and put your makeup on, put your work clothes on. I totally see why that's important for people. I've never really done that, to be honest, but maybe that's just something with my personality. I'm not sure.
Yeah. Okay, that's good. I think it's probably good it's just another thing to be aware about yourself. If you feel more professional about the work that you're doing when you have a nice sweater on or something. Nobody's saying you have to wear a suit or anything, but if you're able to do this in your robe, I think that's awesome. I think whatever works for you is probably what matters.
Yeah, I agree.
And actually, that probably leads us to a good comment is that if anybody's telling you the formula, they're probably trying to sell you something, I would think.
Oh my gosh. Yes.
Yeah.
And I don't know if you've noticed this, but I've become a little bit weary. I feel like there are so many coaches, so to speak, who are telling you how they made all this money doing blah, 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 or how much it grew, whatever for them. I just think I've known some people who have just purchased so many of those courses and they just get one after another after another. I think that, you really have to keep your eye on that.
I agree. I really agree with that. You've got to be careful. Honestly, I heard somebody say earlier that a blog is like a book. There's so many different kinds of successful books out there. There's not just one. And the same is true for your blog. So if there's somebody telling you this is the way that you do it, again, I just think they're probably trying to sell their way of doing it. So be careful.
I agree.
Yeah.
I agree.
Okay, so what would be the number one tip that you would provide to somebody who's new, starting their blog today?
I think the biggest thing is like, what are you trying to do? Like, what is your purpose? I think that, I've listened to so many podcasts with other food bloggers, and I feel like the thing that most people say about when they started is, they never pictured themselves necessarily doing it full time. I think that it's probably possible for people to go into food blogging and they're doing it because they want to try to make it their work from the get-go. I think that's fine and that's beautiful, but there has to be something else. I'm just thinking about like my own business. Like even there have been moments where I've just been so unhappy with the state of my business personally, even though like income-wise, business-wise, I was at the height, like things were fantastic. And it's because like my personal joy and love for the work and like freedom, like all of those things were not there or totally off balance. So I feel like when you're starting out, really ask yourself why you're doing it and don't ever like let outside things like distract you from that. Because even if you find yourself later on in a place of success or making money or, whatever, I think that you have to really protect that genuine love and remember it because it is the biggest driver in sustainability.
That's perfect. So it's like, know your big why. Know why you're doing this.
Yeah.
That's a great sentiment to leave this on. And I just have a couple of fun questions I'd like to ask people at the end. Are you up for that?
Yeah.
Okay. So what's one food item you can't live without?
I would actually have to say eggs. And I kind of copied that from Alton Brown. I read this a long time ago, but he was talking about how amazing eggs are as an ingredient. Like if you think about baking, like eggs are just so pivotal for so many baked goods. So I love eggs. I love like scrambled eggs in the morning too.
I was just going to ask you, what's the favorite way that you do that? Is it scrambled eggs?
I love scrambled eggs, fried eggs. I mean, I love it all. I just think
all
it's
of the
great
above.
Food.
Okay, what's the favorite app on your phone?
I don't know if I'm pronouncing this right, but like Unum or something. It's UNUM. It helps you basically like map out your Instagram a little bit more visually. And this is another one, but I recently discovered Overcast, and a lot of people probably know about it. I probably just had no idea. But it just helps like speed along podcast listening because I love listening to podcasts at the gym now.
And Overcast allows you to like pick the podcasts that you like and they have them kind of queued up for you?
Yeah, so it cuts out. Have you not heard of this before?
I don't think I have.
Oh, wow. Okay, that's funny. My husband told me about it. It basically like cuts out all of the blank space in the podcast, and you can also speed it up. I think the max is like 2.3 times or something, which is actually way too fast. But you can just speed up the audio a little bit, and it'll cut out those blank spaces. So it just helps you listen a little bit quicker.
Interesting. Those probably a few seconds here and there adds up over the, length of the podcast.
Yeah.
I have some podcasts I listen to. I kid you not. They're over an hour. They're like hour and a half, two and a half. Seriously. I think it's a great conversation. Just like, maybe pare it down a little bit. Oh, well, I still like the podcast.
Yes. I agree. Always want to leave them wanting more.
That's right. Exactly. Okay. Do you have any time for TV at all? And if you do, what's your favorite show?
Oh, I'm a Shonda Rhimes fan. I love Scandal and How to Get Away with Murder. I've actually never watched Grey's Anatomy though. But I really love those shows.
So yeah, I actually haven't watched it either. So I'm going to have to put that on my list. I need a lot of entertaining shows to watch. So that's good.
I love TV. That's like one of my decompression times.
Sometimes I feel like we get into these heavy shows or like, we just watch Stranger Things and it's like, I don't know that. And there was something else we watched recently. Fargo. That's really, it's just like gory and I need a break from murder and violence.
Oh my gosh. Yeah. I can't watch those shows.
Yeah.
I can't.
Not my favorite at all. Okay. So how can people find you online?
I'm in a lot of places.
Yeah.
15spatulas.com is my blog. I'm on YouTube at 15spatulas. Twitter, you can email me, Facebook. Basically, all of my tags are at 15spatulas.
Wonderful. Joanne, thank you so much. I've had such a wonderful time talking with you.
This was so fun. Thanks for having me.
Thanks to Joanne Ozug for being my guest on today's episode of the Chopped Podcast. Be sure to go to choppedpodcast.com today to learn more about today's show. Thanks to everyone for your reviews of the podcast on iTunes and Stitcher and social media as well. Please keep spreading the word. It really makes a big difference. You inspire me, and I hope today's show was helpful and inspirational to you as well. Thanks for listening and have a great week.